It scares me about getting AIDS.
Yeah, I mean, you can have sex and you can die.
Specifically, the students that I'm working with do not look at AIDS as something that would happen to them. And the students, the young people who are engaging in risky activities like sexual practices, if they do contract AIDS here while they're at Roosevelt High School or at some other high school level, most likely will not show signs of that until after they are well out of college.
The reason why I keep my pants on is because it's a joke. It doesn't do anything for you. I thought if you had a lot of girls, it'd make you feel like a man. Doesn't work.
What I've heard about safe sex is that it's not really working anymore. Condoms are breaking, birth control is failing, and many kids and young people are just dying.
You know there's not one orgasm in this world that's worth dying for.
Son and his wife were married for 4 years before they found out that they all had AIDS. My grandson was around 3 at the time. Evidently, one of them had to have gotten it before they were married. No one thought, because they were a heterosexual family, that it could be anything like AIDS. In fact, when they went to the clinic, they were assured that they couldn't have AIDS, but they gave them the test anyway. My son had cancer of the liver and of his pelvic bones and in his bone marrow. And she developed cancer of the brain, and there were large lumps all over her head. And she was bleeding from the stomach. It was rather a horrible death for both of them. My son was a very brave person. It's a little hard for me to talk about it. He said, "Mom, they've just found out I have AIDS." And all I could say was, "My God." And he said, "I thought I would live to be at least 60. And then he asked me to make certain that he didn't have much pain. James has suffered. He's had 3 central lines into the large artery that goes into his heart. He's had 2 tubes, NG tubes, put into his stomach, and he's had a gastrostomy, and he's been in a lot of pain. That's the worst, the pain. If you possibly can abstain, do not have sex before marriage. I say this because I know what it means if you should get AIDS. I've gone through all the horrors, all the worst things that I could ever imagine. It isn't worth it. A few moments of pleasure and a lifetime of regret. And those just aren't empty words.
A young life is far too great to throw away on one sexual experience or a high or whatever. I mean, it's far too great. The safe sex condom campaign is simply a matter of continuing in promiscuity and continuing in sexual behavior that really is not safe.
As they were wheeling him in the ambulance, our eyes made contact, and I'd never seen such serious fear on anybody. And he had AIDS. He was about 19 years old, and 6 weeks later, I put him downstairs in the morgue. And I remember as I shut the door and I walked away, I thought, what in the world could we have told you 4 or 5 years ago to do different.
The way I felt with being alone and dumped and 15 and pregnant, to me it wasn't important to worry about him leaving me. It was important to take care of my child and to think of what I'm going to do for my life and the future of my child's life.
I have a girl pregnant 4 months. You know, I think, you know, it's like, I don't know, like, I think about how I'm going to support it, you know. You know, this is going to be like, you know, it's going to be hard for me to support that baby.
I had an abortion without anesthesia. I had an abortion and paid for it with money that was stolen from my job.
When I got pregnant, I had dated this guy for 1.5 years. I thought, of course he'll marry me. You know, we're in love. We've dated 1.5 years. He took off.
Knowing that I'm not going to live to see the fulfillment of the hopes and the dreams that I've had is pretty hard to take. There's a lot of times that I wake up and I cry in the middle of the night. You know, I wake up crying, and there's a lot of times that I just cry even during the day, knowing that I'm just gonna die, and I'm gonna die a pretty painful and horrible death.
What a tragedy that is, and it's all so unnecessary. You've probably heard it said that we're all at risk for AIDS and that anyone can contract HIV. See, that's simply not true. There's an effort out there today to make it appear that everyone is equally likely to come down with this disease. But there are certain behaviors that spread HIV, primarily vaginal and anal intercourse and the sharing of dirty needles and drug abuse. Now, if you avoid those behaviors and you remain sexually abstinent before marriage, and then you marry an uninfected person and you stay faithful for life, you can reduce the risk of AIDS to almost zero. You see, abstinence, which is a choice, it's a choice to refrain from sexual activity, is in fact the only truly protected sex.
After all the diseases that are out there, all the pregnancy, the risk of broken heart, the risk of guilt, depression, the risk of a bad reputation, is it worth the risk?
Not really. It's not worth the risk. Too many negatives.
You know, a lot of our friends will talk to us now, and they're not married, they're single, and they'll say, oh, it's easy for you because you're married, but...
Right, you guys don't have to worry about
Right.
these kinds of things. But you have to remember, too, that it wasn't long ago that I was in high school, that Chelsea was in high school, and we're making the same decisions
We've only been married a year.
that they're making now, and man, am I glad I did.
Even in the area of sex, if you feel like, oh, well, this doesn't, you know, I've already made a bad decision about that, and so, you know, I guess I just have to take my risks. You don't have to.
The terminology that's used today of secondary virginity applies to me because at that point I realized that just having sex did not make me a man.
I believe very strongly that people can start all over again. I don't believe that you can erase some of the scars that happened from, for example, losing your virginity as I did.
I'm going to stick with not having sex till I'm married.
There's really nothing wrong with not having sex, and I just felt free of all the pressures, and it's a lot easier for me to go through life knowing that I don't have to do anything that anybody else tells me to. I have, I think, a great self-image, and I'm fine with the way I am.
A lot of girls would say no if they just knew how to say no in a way that guys could respect and in a way that guys would understand. I remain abstinent and plan to keep my virginity until I get married so that when I get to the altar, I can wear a white dress and mean it, number one. And number two, I could say to my husband, I loved you before I ever knew you, and I saved my life just for you.
And I hear a lot more of, cool, you're a virgin, you know, and it's a lot more positive than it used to be.
I think a guy that is a virgin, you know, is cool, you know.
Love is not
having to have sex. Love is not jumping into bed.
I'm glad that we waited. I'm very glad that we waited. There's an element of trust there that he's mine, and he's not with anybody else.
I want to save myself for my wife because that's what I believe. And I just, it has nothing to do with being a television star. It's about respecting yourself and loving yourself enough and wanting to love the person that you know later on in life, God willing, that I find.
For the safe sex message